forcing the team to trade everyone for new players that he likes and is friends with. But also, what a huge, crazy move it is, or moves, to just clear a whole roster of players, only leaving poor Josh Okogie to be like, I didn't do it. It was Cat. Only leaving him on the Minnesota Timberwolves roster. Like, what would be the equivalent for the Minnesota Vikings? And of course, the roster is much more massive, so it wouldn't be just trade the whole roster, but a move or moves.
In season too, or
not in
because
season,
that's what makes this so hilarious.
I know.
Tomorrow night, people are going to go to Target Center to watch the Clippers game and be like, oh, who are you again?
It's hard to call for the ball when you don't know the guy's name who has it.
Hey, number 7.
Johnson, I think.
Number 7. Can I have the ball?
But what would be the I don't know, correlation, whatever the word is, the move that would be similar, or moves by the Minnesota Vikings this offseason that would have us looking at it the same way we did with this Wolves massive coup, or I don't know what they're calling it there, but just trading everyone.
Cat's coup.
Cat's coup. So what would that be if you are the Minnesota Vikings?
Okay. All right. You know what? This is perfect, because I saw some reckless speculation by Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, yesterday, tying into the fact that while Kyle Shanahan said that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to come back as the 49ers quarterback next season, his contract actually is pretty easy to get out from under. And they go down the path of the fact that Kyle still has wanderlust for Kirk Cousins. Okay. So, because I think to have the massive turnover that you're talking about with the Vikings, it's obviously going to have to, in that case, include some star players, because it can't be just like the offensive line is different, right? Or the defensive line is different. It's got to start with somebody who is seen as a fundamental key to the Vikings. So what if you did this? What if you went to Kirk Cousins and told him Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be let go by San Francisco? Now, we know that you have a no trade for the last year of your contract, but Kyle really wants you, and you love Kyle, and Kyle loves you. And so we are willing to expedite your departure to San Francisco. But instead of just being like, we'll trade you for a draft pick or something, it's going to be a massive package. It's going to be a big trade. In fact, it's going to free up a ton of room. In fact, it's going to involve, let's get really, really reckless and crazy and say it's going to involve Stephon Diggs as well.
Oh, wow.
It's going to involve Stephon Diggs going to San Francisco and Kirk Cousins going to San Francisco, and take your pick of a third or fourth player. Because I don't think it's going to be, because the rosters are so big, it's not going to get to the point, the percentage of your roster that the Wolves got to. But if it started with, let's say, Cousins and Diggs, or Cousins and Cook, and then you got back a corresponding package of young talent, for instance, that would be my jumping off point for something that would strike us as, you know what, this is worth going to City Center and riding down an escalator, in this case with Rick Spielman, Mike Zimmer, and Rob Brzezinski, to unveil the new Vikings.
So I think this is a great pick. Is anything that involves Kirk Cousins not being the quarterback in 2020 is sort of the equivalent of, whoa, I did not see that coming. Now they have a whole new roster and Wiggins is gone. A set of moves or move that really takes you aback and changes the future completely. Moving Cousins at this moment would be totally shocking because of the no trade and of the salary cap hit and how impossible it feels. It is strange to me that Kyle Shanahan would acknowledge that he really wanted to sign Kirk Cousins. And if you're Jimmy Garoppolo, you're like, what did you say, coach?
To the point of we still know that they didn't scout Patrick Mahomes. Yes, I said didn't scout him because Shanahan's admitted he was so convinced the next year he was going to sign Kirk Cousins.
Really wise, by the way. Actually, it is a good play to be like, yeah, we didn't scout him, so we didn't miss on him for sure. No, you missed on him. I didn't miss on him. It was all those other teams. We didn't even scout him because we were going to wait. An NFL team claiming they didn't scout someone is hilarious. They're like on the sidelines at Mankato watching everybody. Could this guy be the next Thielen writing up the report?
Mahomes?
Yeah.
Put that tape away.
A guy who was a guaranteed top pick. Like, yeah, we're not sending anybody out to Texas Tech. Nobody's going to watch it.
You don't want
to
take a look at this tape, Kyle? No, put it away.
I have it right here on a zip disk. Don't you? No.
Unless
Kirk Cousins is my quarterback.
Unless that's on
Sure,
a beta
Kyle.
tape, I'm not watching that Patrick Mahomes highlight.
Boy, the things that teams tell us are never-endingly hilarious. Like, this was the plan all along to trade the whole roster. Anyway, leave that snark for another time.
So Kirk Cousins, starting point.
But here's what I want to ask you, though. When Florio put that on Pro Football Talk, it goes under the category of things that make you go, huh. Like, why is this here? Why did he post that? You assume that Florio talks to more people than it appears, and he writes a lot of vague things that ultimately end up circling around to be true, but he couldn't really say who his source was, or it was just speculation. Do you think there's anything to that? Or if it is entirely just him throwing something at the wall for content in early February? Because even the idea of Cousins hitting the market and them letting go Garoppolo, Cousins hitting the market with plans to sign in San Francisco, if the Vikings have told Cousins, yeah, sorry, bud, it's not going to happen with the extension, or if Cousins has told the Vikings, sorry, Vikings, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to stay here past this year. And we'll start to find these things out really on draft day for sure.
Right.
If they don't sign an extension before draft day, we will find out in the first 2 days of the draft what the plan is at quarterback. Because if they draft somebody in the first and trade up, well, for sure we know the plan. And even if they draft someone in the second or third, there's a pretty high likelihood that that means Gary Kubiak watched somebody on tape that he loved and wants to be his next quarterback, and they're going to move on from Cousins. And that would free up Jimmy Garoppolo, who, by the way, is getting crushed for the Super Bowl, like not winning it over Patrick Mahomes. He was up 10 points in the fourth quarter. He gets a ball knocked down, and his offensive line sort of lets him down. They didn't stick with the running game late in the game to wind the clock out. And the rest of that game, at one point, he's 18 for 22. He made a perfect throw to George Kittle that was real questionable on whether that was pass interference. I'm sure Kyle Rudolph was at home going, no, I don't think so. I don't think that was pass interference. 21-5 as a starter with a Super Bowl appearance, and was good enough to be up by 10 points in the fourth quarter against Mahomes.
Right.
I mean, if that were to come to fruition, are you mad about it? I mean, I think Vikings fans would sign up for it.
Okay, so back to your question about if Florio is just basically sitting down in front of his computer and making stuff up, or he's got something. He just spent the entire week in Miami at the Super Bowl talking to people, right? A large contingent of executives were probably there from San Francisco, right? Goes to parties. People start drinking. People start talking. Combine's the same way.
That does happen.
Marriott Hotel at the Combine is a wealth of information from people who are employed by teams who ordinarily won't tell you it's Wednesday, but get 3 or 4 Bud Lights in them, and all of a sudden will start spilling their guts about how much they hate their left tackle, okay?
Yep.
Mike Florio just spent a week at the Super Bowl talking to people that know Kyle Shanahan well. And my guess is that Kyle's flat out said, I like Garoppolo, but you know who my guy was, right? And they say, who?
Which is
Kyle?
so weird because they're the same guy, except for Garoppolo's got a little bit more of a baller mentality.
But you've covered people. People are weird, man. People get hung up on weird things.
No, you're right.
And
you're right. They fall in love with their guy for sure.
And your first quarterback, or among your first, can be the unrequited love.
Ask Mike Zimmer about Teddy
of your life.
Yep.
Exactly right. Yep. So do I think that Mike Florio, who, by the way, also is invested in that storyline as a big Viking fan, is making it up? No. I think he was probably told flat out by somebody, Kyle still loves Kirk. Do I think that Kyle and Kirk talk? Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Do I think it's plausible that Kirk Cousins is the starting quarterback, especially with after 2020, how cheap San Francisco can get off the Garoppolo hook? Do I think that in 2021, there's a chance that Kirk is the 49ers starting quarterback? Absolutely.
Since we're just being completely reckless, let's take this all the way down the road. So that would mean if that's Kirk Cousins' plan and that's Kyle Shanahan's plan, let's say behind the scenes, they get together and they have some sort of strange, expensive water together. And they sit down and they say, we got to figure it out. Just like these NBA players do. Only they do it via, Instagram DM or something. But these guys are Gen X or maybe, millennials still probably get together in person. So they sit down and they talk about it. Like, we got to make this happen, man. It's got to be It's got to be a coup. It's got to be a Kirk coup. Cat got his. I need mine.
Yep.
I'm going to San Francisco eventually, and his contract, like you said, Garoppolo's is set up. So would you prefer that the Vikings ended up ultimately, if Kirk said, I'm not signing with you guys, that they ended up with Garoppolo, or that they drafted somebody now, or that they drafted someone later when we get there? What's the best plan? And we haven't really talked much about this at all. The idea that Kirk might say, thanks for the memories, but I'm going to go try something else. If that were to happen, they need to know that by draft day this year, right?
Yes, and you would think that at that point that's a mutual thing where perhaps the Vikings go to Kirk's camp and say, "Will you do an extension that's favorable to us?" And Kirk's camp is like, "Oh no, sorry, we're either going to break the bank again or walk." And at that point in time, I think if you're Rick Spielman and Brzezinski and Zimmer and the Vikings, you say, "Okay, you're going to have to walk." That's a conversation that will probably leak out eventually, not immediately necessarily. But yes, by the time that you get to the draft, that decision has to be made. And as far as my path goes, my preferable path would be to find a quarterback who's not Garoppolo, that you could ideally draft. But then I'll defer back to you and say, and I think that your answer is going to be positive, but I'm not sure. Do you trust Kubiak to be the guy to identify and develop that quarterback? Because it's not going to be Mike.
Do. Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be Mike.
Right.
I get that.
Yes.
So if you trust that, then I would tell you I would rather go that route.
Of all the people walking around this sphere-shaped thing that we live on and float through space, Gary Kubiak's got to be in the top 50 of human beings that you would want to pick out your next quarterback, right? It's not overhype with him. I mean, it's not just he was a product of Elway. This is the guy who took Brian Greasy, a third-round pick, and our buddy Gus Frerotte, and went 11-5. He revamped Jake Plummer's career. He revamped Matt Schaub's career. And here we are with Kirk setting career highs in a bunch of categories, including quarterback rating, his most wins in a season, his highest PFF grade, all with Kubs' offense. I mean, I think it's proven that the guy knows what he's doing. So but even if we go a little farther with this, if he said, you know what? I know you guys want to trade the whole farm for Tua, but I've got a guy for you. I really love Anthony Gordon from Washington State, who's a name to keep an eye on, by the way. He's a perfect sort of Kubiak style quarterback who is not the most athletic or mobile. He's very much like Kirk. He's pretty accurate. Sage Rosenfels, our friend, has worked with him a little bit, when he was preparing for the Senior Bowl. And I watched him play in the Senior Bowl and thought, yeah, this is kind of a Kubiak type of quarterback. If he said, let's draft that guy in the third round or late second and then turn it over to him, I think at very least it ends up being sort of a bridge to whatever is next, or it ends up being your franchise guy who gives you very similar numbers to Kirk Cousins. I guess what I'm getting at is if Kirk told you to go fly a kite, you've got some pretty interesting options there. Of you try a guy, and if you have him behind Kirk for a year and it doesn't work, that's totally okay. Because I mean, you're going with the crazy scenario that they trade him now, but I think it's even a little bit off the beaten trail that Kirk would just tell them, no, that's not going to happen, and then
I think that's very possible.
Then they're talking about
that's not crazy at all.
Quarterback situation.
I'm with you.
So the options become really interesting there, and I think if you're the Vikings, that doesn't break your heart. If Kirk says, yeah, I got to go play with Shanny, I don't think it crushes your soul, and I don't think that it sets back your organization as much as maybe they'll think.
We do agree, I believe, that Kirk does need to at least partially return on your terms, right? Like you can't have Kirk be like, got to do it again, boys, got to set parameters for a contract. I don't think that if you're the Vikings, you can say, most definitely. I think at that point you have to say, Kirk, if we're going to bring you back, which can be debated, but if we're going to do that, it's got to be at least partially on our terms.
So that's an interesting question, because what is that conversation like between them and Kirk? Let's say that he has not hatched the plan over expensive water with Kyle Shanahan, and he is cool with staying here and wants to raise his kids in old Minnesota and during the winter months in Florida or somewhere warmer than this.
Go to Pizza Ranch once in a while.
Cannot blame him for wanting to be in warmer spaces. But let's just say that he wants to raise the kids here in Minnesota. His wife loves it. She wants to stay. She's become one of us. Huge hot dish fan. Let's just say all that. So he goes to the the team and he says, look, guys, I won you a playoff game. I'm 5th best quarterback by PFF. I got this quarterback rating and all these numbers. Even look at my quarterback rating since 2015. I'm 5th or 6th or whatever it might be. What do they come back with to Kirk to convince him that he should take less? This is where I have trouble with it, because I get a tweet from someone every day like, hey, do you think Kirk would take a team-friendly deal? And if I'm his representation,
right,
I'm having a very difficult time understanding why my client should take less.
I would say that if I was the Vikings and I'm Rick Spielman and I'm trying to make that case, I say, because Kirk, we need to get more around you. And in a salary cap league, which this is, the way to do that is to still make you rich, but not as rich as we made you last time, which I'm not saying the terms of that deal now 2 years back are terrible, but at that time, I believe it made him the highest paid player in the history of the league on that date.
Yeah.
And so if he wants to go with that again and say, I want a contract that is now commensurate to that for 2021, I've got to say, then I can't do that, Kirk, because I'm trying to get as many parts around you as possible. And that's just going to eat up, as we've seen now for the last couple of years, too much of my working salary cap.
But if I'm Kirk.
But I mean, you could tell me to fly a kite.
Right. And I look at Aaron Rodgers and I look at Russell Wilson. I mean, even ancient Ben Roethlisberger is making average annual value of $34 million a year. And you would say, look, I'm better than Jared Goff, is what he would say. I mean, I'm not sure how many people agree exactly. Goff slips back, but was in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and that's not where Kirk has ever been. Carson Wentz is going to make $32 million per year. These guys now have cleared by quite a bit Kirk Cousins in terms of guaranteed money. Matt Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz. So now his deal is coming up. The top right now in terms of average annual value is $35 million, and it's Russell Wilson. But that deal was signed last year. So if you're Kirk, you're going to say, well, yeah, I mean, it was signed before the salary cap went up. Right. I'm going to want whatever it is. And this is a guy, too, who got creative enough to make his whole thing guaranteed. Yep. He might want to be one of those guys that makes up X percentage of the cap. He's clever like this. But there could be 17 games coming.
This is why the 49ers thing makes sense.
Yeah.
Because Kirk strikes me as the type of guy who would think, because do you think Kirk goes home at night or after a season comes to an end and thinks to himself, I've got to examine myself and what I've done wrong here? Or do you think he goes home at night like a lot of athletes do who are really good at what they do and thinks, if only things around me were right, because I did a lot right this year. I did a lot of things right. And if part of his thought process, and I'm willing to bet that when he calls this guy out in the Bay Area, he's told this, that Kyle says, man, if I was working with you on that, we would have done this and we would have done that. And Kirk thinks to himself, you know what? I would have thrived there. Yeah. I just think the way his brain works actually makes the San Francisco thing more likely.
I really need somebody like Kyle. I guess, I could see that as being a reasonable thought from Cousins, that he would want to go and be with his buddy Kyle. I guess I'm just thinking from the perspective of this idea that he would take less. Like, can I actually make that work in my brain? I have a really tough time doing that. If there's one team that wants him, and let's say that is San Francisco, and they want to move on from Jimmy, because you know that San Francisco, like every other Super Bowl team, goes 10-6 next year. Or goes 9-7 next year. They always do.
Very likely to take a step
Tom
back.
Brady doesn't play quarterback for you. That's what's happening.
And Richard Sherman is just old now, and something happens. Yep, I agree.
So they're going to step back, and then San Francisco's going to go, you know what? Jimmy G is just not the guy.
Yep.
He's just not good enough, and we need to go get Kirk. So if Kirk goes to the Vikings and says, well, I know already that San Francisco is going to pay me, that they want me, that I'm going to go play with my buddy Kyle.
Yes.
But what are you guys going to bring to the table? All he needs is one. Yes. All he needs is San Francisco. And then we get to an impasse where the Vikings can't get him to take less. And think about what your argument would have to be. If you were going to try to have a debate club and little kid X is arguing for Kirk's big contract, little kid Y is arguing that he has to take less. Little kid Y is saying, well, you haven't won anything. And you'd be like, wait, isn't that a reason for us not to keep you?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's your only argument is
an arbitration hearing would actually try and destroy him.
Yeah.
And then you'd be like, well, I really don't want to pay him.
Right. Exactly.
You're right.
Exactly. The only argument for him to take less to stay with you is sort of fundamentally built on the fact that you think he can't win.
And here's why I don't think he takes a team-friendly deal, Matthew. I don't think he does, because going back to when he finally got a chance to leave Washington, he didn't bat an eye at leveraging the Jets against the Vikings.
Yep.
And basically, because we know for a fact that if the Jets don't play ball with Kirk doesn't come here.
Yeah.
He would have probably gone to the Jets. So he basically got to his sticker price point, right?
Yep.
And said, and in what we saw, so we saw it. He basically said, I won.
Yeah.
Got what I wanted. And it didn't matter.
Out there on TV
and the Vikings
too.
could have been team whatever that he judged to be a better fit to win right then.
Yep.
So it didn't matter if it was Minnesota, it could have been Chicago if they had been in the same predicament, could have been Miami. It was all about leveraging the Jets to get what you wanted from a team where you thought, maybe mistakenly so, that you